Hello and welcome to China Focus. I'm Shelley Zhang. Earlier this week, China's Ministry of Health and the state-run Red Cross Society of China announced that the country would be implementing a nationwide organ donation system by the end of this year. Now that comes as China's transplant system, the second largest in the world, has come under increasing scrutiny over the last year. The allegations are that Chinese state-run hospitals are killing prisoners of conscience for their organs so that the organs can then be sold for transplant. In fact, this week in Taiwan, there's a meeting of international researchers and medical professionals to discuss the issue, including what lawmakers there can do to stop transplant tourism. So here to talk about this today, we have Matt Ganezda. So Matt, it seems like the Chinese Ministry of Health really are pretty proud of this organ donation system. They're really trying to push it. We've heard a lot in the last few months.
Yeah, it's pretty unusual. But what's more unusual is that even if the data is accurate, 1,800 transplants of this new organ donation system in the last 3 years, that still doesn't account for the much, much higher number of organs that have actually been transplanted over the last 3 years, about 30,000 over 3 years, as China's Vice Minister of Health has said. So we're talking about still a huge gap in the number of organ transplants.
Well, Huang Jifu says that those organs are coming from executed prisoners, which they plan to phase out in the next 2 years.
Yeah, but even so, it still doesn't add up. I mean, it seems like he's talking about executed criminals, that is, people who were executed through the criminal justice system. But, if you look at the numbers, for example, Amnesty International, until recently, they did estimates every year of how many people were executed, and on average, it's about 1,700. It goes up and down. But even if it's 2 to 3 times as much, that's still not enough to account for all those 10,000 transplants every year, even if you include also the pilot organ donation system, which has only come recently. So there's really a lot that's not adding up here.
We don't really know the number of people who've been executed every year. It's considered a state secret. But interestingly, Huang Jifu said in the same meeting where they were announcing the new organ donation, nationwide program, he said something about how the number of, death penalty executions has been declining by about 10% a year.
Yeah, well, what I'd really like to see is actual data on China's nationwide organ transplant system. I mean, look, every other country does this. The World Health Organization has basically a set of guiding principles, and included is that donations and transplants have to be transparent and open to scrutiny. And China's system is absolutely not. Here's what transparent and open to scrutiny looks like. This is from US data they've got, every year, every type of transplant, meticulously, different types. Every country is like this, because it's such a serious issue. You've got to track it. You've got to have it be transparent. China's organ donation system is totally opaque, and all we've really been able to find out about how many transplants there are is, Huang Jifu has said many times it's about 10,000 a year, but the actual data is not there. There's no, public data, no accountability on government websites. He's given presentations, but for example, this is actually a presentation that Huang Jifu gave in Madrid in 2010. It's to a group of medical professionals, but this is, some of the only data we've even gotten, and it's sparse, it's totally inconsistent. Data from slide 5 doesn't match the data on slide 19. Even though we're talking about the same thing, kidney transplants each year. If the data doesn't match within his own presentation, I mean, what's going on? Are they unable to keep track? That's pretty unlikely. There's something going on, and we're not being told what that is.
Well, I think for me, we've done several of these shows now about the organ transplant system in China and some of the allegations of, taking organs from prisoners of conscience and selling them basically for transplants. But every time that this comes up, the issue of data, it becomes really confusing to look at their numbers. A lot of numbers come from what Huang Jifu says, or what this reported in state-run media. It seems like the only consistent number we have is about 10,000 organ transplants a year. That's what they keep saying. But everything else seems to be up in the air. It's very hard to be able to figure out what they're talking about.
And I think that is intentional, or it's certainly intentional that they're not clarifying what's going on, because having all this different sets of data and a piece here and a piece there is keeping everyone guessing. But the issue is it is the Chinese government's responsibility, if they're going to carry out organ transplants, to make that data transparent and open to scrutiny. So because there's so many questions about how their system actually works and what's going on, what we really should be doing is saying, look, we're asking this question. You need to provide this data like every other country does. If you want to be treated like other countries, you have to provide the same kind of data.
So it seems that, going back to this organ donation system, they've been pretty proud of it, and they're saying now we're going to launch it nationwide by the end of the year. This is how many organs we've had through the donation system, but it seems like they're really optimistic. Huang Jiefu seems really optimistic about the number of donations they can get through this donation program. He's saying that, he feels that they can get about 40,000 organ donors, and that would equate to about maybe 100,000 organs. So, right now he's saying we do 10,000 transplants a year. We could do 100,000 with this new donation program.
Yeah, but you have to get people to want to donate their organs. I mean, look, in China, there's a sort of cultural value that people don't want to donate their organs after death, because people, better than I, that Chinese people generally they feel like they should have their body and their organs intact after death. And so to completely change this sort of organ donation system, you have to first change these deeply rooted cultural values. And that doesn't just take 1 or 2 years. We're talking about something that takes decades. And so it's extremely difficult to do. And I totally agree. Huang Jiefu is being wildly optimistic about what's possible.
I mean, if you compare it to, for example, the United States, is the rate of organ donation similar to what we see here?
No, it's like 1 in 40,000 people who were signed up to be donors in the U.S. or 1 in 4,000 end up actually being donors. But in China, Huang Jiefu is suggesting it's like 1 in 3, 1 in 4. I mean, it's totally absurd.
So Huang Jiefu has been saying, we're going to reduce the number of organs we take from executed prisoners. We're going to completely stop taking organs from executed prisoners within the next 2 years. Does that seem likely if this organ donation system doesn't take off the way he thinks it is?
Well, there's no way to do it, because if they want to carry out 10,000 a year and they're not getting enough donations to meet that demand, then how do you fill in the gap? They've got to fill it in some way. Now, you're going to either fill it in by increasing the number of executions, or you got to figure out some other method.
So he talks about executed prisoners all the time now, but this is something that nobody in China was admitting. The Chinese officials did not admit until 2009 that they even used executed prisoners, but human rights groups have known that they've used executed prisoners since the 90s. So it was kind of a about-face that Huang Jiefu started coming out and saying pretty much every time he talks about organ transplants, like we use organs from executed criminals, we use organs from executed prisoners. He says this all the time. Now, is this just him coming out and saying this?
If it were just him, after the first time he said it, he would have had to stop saying it. So obviously this is something that's allowed, that's encouraged by the regime in general. It's like, look, black jails are the same kind of example. Like Chinese officials, repeatedly said there are no black jails in China, and then all of a sudden recently they're like, oh yeah, there are black jails, but we're cracking down on these criminals who are running these black jails. And the reason for doing that is because they want to shift the focus from how bad this sort of state-run system is to, the Chinese government and Communist Party are, cracking down and trying to eliminate this bad thing.
Not to mention where the bad thing came from in the first place.
Right. I mean, look, the executed criminals issue is still, like most people around the world, like this isn't a normal thing to do. Like you don't just take people who are on death row and take their organs. But in China, that's actually less bad than where it's now increasingly believed the organs are actually coming from, which is prisoners of conscience, like Falun Gong practitioners. So the executed criminal seems less bad, and therefore by highlighting that now and then saying we're trying to reduce this, they're basically trying to shift attention away from the real issue, which is incredibly serious. So
what you're saying is this is what they would like to happen, that, they say, we are taking organs from executed prisoners right now. People have been condemned to the death penalty through the criminal justice system, but we're going to stop doing that within the next 2 years, and we're going to shift to this organ donation system. And then nobody will ask any questions about, whether they have been taking organs from, people who have been imprisoned for their beliefs, prisoners of conscience.
Well, I think that's their hope, but I'm unclear that it's going to really make that big of a difference.
In what sense?
Well, I mean, it's like you can't just hide a decade of killing innocent people for their organs by saying, oh, we've been doing this other method and now we're trying to reform it. Like, you can't hide what's already been done and what probably is still taking place, although we don't know for sure how, what scale it's taking place on. But you can't just, pretend that, this decade plus of history didn't happen by shifting your focus. But I think they hope that is going to happen, that people will shift their focus away from the prisoners of conscience issue.
Do you see that happening? I mean, we talked about...
No, there's even more attention on the prisoners of conscience thing. Look, last year the U.S. Congress held a hearing specifically on it. It was raised at a hearing in the European Parliament on religious persecution. It was raised in Canada in January on an issue of organ harvesting in Parliament. And so this is getting increasing international scrutiny. And because of this increasing scrutiny, now Huang Zhifu and the Party Central in general feel more pressure to try to shift focus away from that.
So let's talk about what happened in Taiwan this week. Kind of coincidentally, at the same time that they're announcing that they're going to do this nationwide donation system by the end of the year. In Taiwan, there was a meeting of international researchers, medical professionals, just about the kind of issue of transplant tourism to China.
Yeah, I mean, one way that a lot of legislators, not just in Taiwan but in different countries, feels, how do we rein in, or how do we stop this forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience or unwilling donors? One way is to prevent organ transplant tourism, where people from their country go over. So you can say, okay, well, we're going to do a law where if you go to China to get an organ and you can't prove the source of the organ, then you're not going to get medical insurance, you're not going to be able to get medical treatment in this country. So by trying to rein that in, at least they're doing one piece of it, and it also brings up the issue on a wider scale. Israel actually passed some legislation in 2012 that basically made it impossible to go to China to get organ transplants and still get medical care in Israel. And New South Wales in Australia is considering legislation about organ transplant tourism in the same regard. Certain Taiwan legislators this week have been discussing that as well.
So with this kind of increased international scrutiny on China's transplant system, do you think we're going to see more in terms of people coming out and talking about organ donation or in mainland China? I
think we're going to always see the Communist Party trying to cover up what they've done, and we're going to see more focus on the organ donation system, and they'll probably make more announcements throughout the year about their organ donation system and how great it is. But again, it's to shift focus away from the heinous crime of killing prisoners of conscience for their organs. And as we see legislators in different countries around the world trying to pass laws, raising awareness of this in hearings and so on, it's just going to increase that pressure on the Chinese Communist Party. But I don't think we're going to see them all of a sudden reveal their data.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us today and talking about this issue, Matt. And thank you for watching. For more on this and other issues in China, join us at ntd.tv.